Welcome to this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Joseph Bolton. He is an author and storyteller. He is the author of Old Grandmother's Tree, and we learn from him the power of storytelling in keeping traditions alive and connecting with our roots. Welcome to the show, Joseph.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm very happy to be here this morning.
You are welcome. Welcome to the show, Joseph. Welcome to India in this online form.
Mhm.
And I'm sure not just in India, but a lot of people across the globe will benefit from what we are going to talk right now. We'll talk with you about folktales. We'll talk about heritage. We'll talk about storytelling. We'll talk all about this. But first, let's talk a bit about your background, your journey, so that people know who they are listening to.
Okay. Well, probably the most important thing to know is I grew up in New England as my mother's family was a old French Canadian family in New England. And when I was a child growing up, my grandparents and my grandfather's sisters would tell us tales and stories of life in this magical place known as Quebec in Canada. And I was always curious, like a lot of children probably were, like, where do we come from? How do I connect in with my ancestors in the past? And, that was an open question. But then, thanks to all the tools we have, like ancestry research tools, DNA tests, I was actually able to discover my ancestors in Quebec and discovered their stories. And so taking inspired by their stories and the real and their actual history, and inspired by my love of folk tales and storytelling. I love folk tales ever since I was a child growing up, and my ancestors, and in particular one ancestor in particular named Mitio Goku, a young Algonquin woman who grew up, who was lived in Quebec in the 17th century, and her fantastic story. So I took all of that and I blended it together into a two-book series called Old Grandmother's Tree. And my Algonquin ancestor, Mitio Goku, as I mentioned, she is the old grandmother of that story. So what makes these books unique is I took real historic people, my ancestors, and I put them in a magic folk tale setting within Quebec itself. So my historic ancestors are interacting with Native American trickster animals, they're experiencing magic, but I'm also telling their story. And I love the folk tale setting. I didn't want to tell, a lot of people have written about their ancestors, they would tell like a historic fiction. But I love the language of a folk tale because a folk tale are universal. If you read folk tales from all around the world, it's a universal language. And so by setting my ancestors in that kind of folklore setting, I think I was able to tell a much richer story about their lives and who they were.
Absolutely, absolutely, Joseph. So I want to understand, sometimes about the grand design of life. You see, you talk about the golden age of French Canadian culture in New England, France, Canada,
Hmm.
New England, which is in US.
Yes.
How should one make sense of that belongingness of what folk tales he or she should understand? Sometimes it can get confusing, especially for the new generation. If you tell them about the heritage, how should they understand all these things? Should they leave it behind? Should they forge their new path forward?
I think that's a very interesting question. And my grandparents, although they were born in the United States, their parents were born in Canada and they immigrated here. And I think at the time when I was young and my mother was growing up, there was a sense of we're Americans now. We should leave the old country behind. And I and now looking back on it, as I understand my heritage, I'm starting to learn French now because I didn't learn as a child. No one encouraged me to learn that. I don't think we need to abandon our old cultural heritage of the land of our grandparents or great grandparents. And in truth, we are the continuation of the story of our ancestors. So their stories doesn't end with their passing. We are their story, a direct continuation of that. And so understanding our culture, hanging on to part of that, even living in a different country than our ancestors live in, that enriches our lives. That makes us a better whole person.
Absolutely, absolutely. I agree with the sentiments, and I also am with you in this. But for my audience, I need to understand it in a much more different way, Joseph. So let's look at this thing called, you heard all these stories of a mysterious and magical place which you call at Quebec in Canada. And looking
Yes.
at the past, you see, but a lot of people have their own understanding of the great places that their ancestors belong to and all. And many people do visit. What do you think? People should visit those places which are in their imagination, mystical, great places.
Oh,
How do you think they will feel when they go it in present day?
absolutely, absolutely. Um, it's really interesting. Like for example, when I visit Quebec, and so I'm walking around a place that my ancestors walked in. I'm looking around at people that are literally my cousins, French Canadians. All French Canadians as a population are probably have ancestors in common. So everyone around I see are actually my ancestors. And it's kind of a strange experience because in one sense, I feel like I belong. But other sense, there's also a sense of separation that I don't quite fit in. And as every time I've gone to Quebec, I've never been shy about meeting people and talking people and talking to them about this book project called Old Grandmother's Tree. And I see myself as a child of Quebec in the distance who's kind of writing home. By writing the Old Grandmother's Tree, I'm writing home back to my ancestors. I'm writing back home to my family in Quebec. And there is a kind of tension there. And I think I would say to anyone who would visit the land of their ancestors, you're going to experience that tension. But that tension, I would say it's not a bad thing. I think that tension helps drive creativity and introspection within yourself. And I think for me, I think that tension of trying to connect in back with the old country, but knowing that I'm kind of separated, that tension gave me energy to write these stories and put that in there. It's my way at a deep level of reaching back out to those ancestors and to my family in Canada.
Absolutely, absolutely, Joseph. Sometimes this can be very bittersweet. How do you feel? Especially, you see, politics can change when people are talking about, Canada, the present administration. You get torn into, in between. You just don't know how to reconcile with your
I
feelings
I
and
know it. Seeing some of the tensions. I try to avoid politics because I think sometimes it can be very divisive and doesn't build bridges. But I would say, watching the current situation between Canada and the United States, for me, it's like being a child watching your parents fight. You you don't want to take sides, and it breaks your heart and it hurts you to see it, and it really does. It hurts me personally to see it, and because when I go to Canada, I love being there, and I don't want somebody to look at me and say, "Well, you're an American. You come from there. You have nothing to do with us," and that's really not true, and it doesn't really reflect the love that I have for Canada within my own heart.
absolutely, absolutely. And my ancestors also have seen a lot of this, with this partition during our independence in
Mm.
1947. And those stories, when we read, we can understand what they must have gone through. So a lot of people, especially the young generation, will say, listen to the elders, that listen, your tales are very good, but I should, I have to forge my new identity because it is pulling me behind. because people are questioning my loyalty towards, towards the flag,
Hmm.
towards your feelings, towards your tales. I get, broken into pieces when I get to fight all
Hmm.
these things, at different places. Sometimes some things can, turn very difficult for them. How do you like to tell them how to look at the past with pride, but also look at the present with much more, greater stability, and in terms of understanding that this is where you belong now?
Well, I would say that this is something you have to. There's not one solution that I can share with everybody. Says this: you have to resolve that within yourself and find that balance that fits for you. But I would say that loving the land of your ancestors and the culture that you came from, and embracing that and within yourself and passing it on to the next generation, that is not mutually exclusive from loving the country that you were born in and that you grew up in. I love the United States. This is the land that I was born in. This is the place where I grew up. But I also love Canada. I can love both, and you can love both as well. And I think that by embracing the old and carrying it forward and remembering that you are the story of your ancestors, you are the one carrying all their hopes, their dreams for a better life, their hopes and dreams of a better life for you. You are carrying that treasure forward, and that is a treasure, and it's not mutually exclusive. It's not one or the other. It's almost a false choice.
Absolutely. So, for the young generation, especially, what to do with all that wisdom, knowledge, understanding of of one's ancestors? There has to be a way to, make use of it, make use of all that knowledge in the present times. How have you? Let us come to your book. Grand old grandmother's tree, so
Yes.
that one can know how have you dealt about these things in the book,
Well,
how to make
let
sense
me.
of it all.
I think a great way for me to answer that question, like how do I can let me, if I may, talk about my ancestor, the old grandmother of the old grandmother's tree, and you know, and this is kind of illustrates a little bit what I'm talking about. Continuing on the story with my ancestors. So when she was 22 years old, she was living in Quebec. She had a happy life. She was married to another Algonquin Native American man. That she had two small children. And another Native American tribe from New York in the South came up into Quebec, raided the village that she was at, and in the attack, her husband was killed, and her two small children were kidnapped, and she never saw them again. So here she is. She's 22 years old. She lost her husband. She lost her children. She lost everything. And but she didn't, turn to a person of bitterness or defeat. And 5 years later, she married another man, a French settler, and together they became my ancestors. So I'm a continuation of her story of hope. And I would like to share with you something that when she died, the priest in Trois-Rivières wrote this about her. And this is what he said right after she died in 1699. It says he wrote, Mitio Goku lived a full life with dignity, respect, and love, a courageous and loving Algonquin woman. So when you think about it, that's the most to me that's like one of the most beautiful eulogies you could ever have written about yourself. Wouldn't we want somebody to say he lived a full life? He lived a life of love for everyone else. He lived a life of dignity and respect. So all those years after this tragic events happened to her, she still lived a life of full life of with interconnected with other people, a life of love, courage, dignity, and respect. And so that became the foundation for her children and her grandchildren. And so who I am today, even hundreds of years later, there's part of her story because of what she did, because she had the courage to live and not to get discouraged and to start over again. I'm here. I'm the continuation of that story that she started. So when you dig back into your ancestors, this is what I would say to young people. When you start going back into your ancestors, you are going to find stories of people, of your ancestors who have lived a life of love and dignity and respect, of who contributed to their community, their village, where they lived, and to their family. And how they took that, all that courage, that dignity and respect, and they passed it on to their family. And whether you realize it or not, is what I would say to the young people. You carry some of that within yourself. And so you need to respect it, not just for them, their memory, but also for yourself.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, what have you? What tell us more about the book? Means what have you dealt? You said it is now it's in two parts.
Yes, if I may, I'm going to show you the cover.
Yeah, yeah,
So
absolutely.
here's cover one. And on this cover tells a lot about the book. So this woman right here on the front, that's Mitio Goku, my ancestor. And she's surrounded by some of the Native American trickster animal characters, a bear, a raccoon, a fox over here, a moose. And in the center is the spirit of her dead husband on her wedding night to Pierre Cauc, the French settler she married later. And here's a volume 2 of that story. And this picture shows her grandfather, and also some of the other trickster animals, the same fox, the same bear. And what makes this story kind of interesting is that the trickster animal characters, because they're kind of magical, they live for a long time. So they get to know and interact with Mitio Goku, the old grandmother. But they also interact with her descendants, her great-great-great-grandchildren in Quebec in the early 1900s. So they also represent the continuity of memory and culture of those ancestors, and they kind of pass it on. They're kind of a stand-in for that. So the stories are kind of a mix. Some of them are kind of poignant, I would say, especially the story that retells how Mitio Goku and Pierre Cauc married, how they became married. Some are kind of silly, and because folk tales are supposed to be kind of funny sometimes and amusing. One story shows farm animals at midnight taking a toboggan and going sledding down the hill, escaping the barn and going sledding down the hill. And then my great-great-grandmother in the story, who's the farm woman, finds him. And at first she wants to chastise these farm animals for leaving at night, but she ends up getting on the toboggan and going sliding down the hill with them. So it's a little bit of silliness, a little bit of poignant. All the stories have some kind of lesson in them about kindness, about family, about forgiveness, or just having fun and just living a life of fun and joy. And because I do that because all folktales, good folktales, have a lesson in there. They don't necessarily hit you on the head with it, but it comes out of the story naturally. And that's part of what makes them really enjoyable and why they're such a universal language, because all those issues that we deal with, they apply to all of us, no matter what part of the world that we live in.
Absolutely, absolutely. Joseph, do you ever worry that, with the present way things are with AI and so much things, artificial, shiny, that these tales will perhaps get lost in the thing, or do you think it will
Yeah,
all continue?
for one thing, I do not have any AI writing tools on my computer because I don't want to take any chance of my writing getting contaminated. And that's the only word I'm going to choose to use: contaminated by AI. I want my stories to be organic from me and to be from my imagination, from my heart. So my recommendation, if you're a writer and you have AI in your computer, delete it. Get rid of it. Don't use it. You're not a writer if you have to use AI for creative writing. The second thing I did is I had the pleasure of working with two great artists on this book, and neither one of them used AI. The first artist I used was a storyboard artist. So she did the kind of the layout plan of all these illustrations within the book. Like I said, there's 450 of them. So there's a lot of planning had to go on. So she did that for me. Her name is Masami Kiyono. She lives in Manhattan in New York. And the second artist I worked with was a woman named Natasha Pelly-Smith. She lives in Toronto, up in Canada. And she takes those rough sketches and creates a final sketches that adds the color, the depth, and I think the soul to these illustrations. If it'd be I don't know how well they would turn up if I tried to show you on some of these, how well they turn up, but these
Wonderful.
illustrations.
Wonderful.
Yes,
I can see them. Yes.
yes. And they're beautiful, and they have depth, they have soul. And I think right away when you look at a AI driven art, it has a certain feel to it, and it looks odd. Here's another one right here.
Yes.
And so I would say I think AI is a danger. I think it is. I think for one, I think it creates stories that don't have any depth. They seem like they're fine on the surface, but as you start thinking about them, something's missing. And I also think that a reliance on AI in art to draw the illustrations or to write your stories is, quite frankly, lazy. It's lazy, and I think that as little effort as you're going to put into it because you rely on AI, well, you're not going to get very much out of the process either. Certainly not much joy. And nobody else is going to benefit from it as well.
Absolutely. So, Joseph, what is your advice to the next generation to preserve these stories, these traditions, this connection with the roots? What's the best way for them to do so, to keep everything alive? Means, is it in words? Is it with books? What is the way?
I think the first thing you need to do, if you're a young person and you go visit your grandparents, you go visit your aunts and uncles, is you put away the cell phone, put away the iPad, get away from the TV, and you sit there with your grandparents and your ancestors and your elders, and you talk to them, and you ask them questions. What did you like to do when you were a little girl, little boy? What were some of the adventures you had? What were some of the experience? What was some of the experience that gave you joy? What were some of the experience that maybe hurt you? But that's important to understand too. What are some of the, ask them stories. What was the most important thing you did with your life? What did you accomplish? And just engage that conversation. And I think it's such a strong temptation as a younger person. You become so focused on the moment, on all the connections and through the internet. You don't see the richness that's right next to you. You lose track of, they're just boring old people. No, they're not boring old people. And someday, if you're not careful, you'll be a boring old person too. So reach out to them, because that time is limited. Someday they'll be gone. My grandparents are all gone now. My great aunts that I used to hear from, they're gone. And although I did spend a lot of time talking with them, I can still look back on times when I was a child that, I wish I had spent just a little bit more time capturing those stories, and then do something with it. Do something with those stories. You can capture them, write them down. You could even retell them in a kind of a magical folklore setting using the culture that your ancestors came from. It was a great experience doing that, but there's some way capture those stories and then pass them on, and be proud of those stories, and be proud of the fact that your ancestors were real people with dreams, joys.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There is so much to learn about all these things from you, Joseph, and from your books. And I'm sure a lot of people would want to know more from you, about your book, where they can buy the book, and about storytelling. What's the best way for them to do so?
Well, you can buy the books on Amazon, and that may be the easiest way to do it. The books are for sale in a couple of places. We just got started on this process, so there are a couple of bookstores in New England that have it available, but Amazon's the easiest. If you're in Quebec and you want to buy the books are actually for sale at the St. Catherine Shrine at the Mohawk Reservation in Quebec. And but Amazon is a great way to find it. Also, you can look on my website. I have a lot of additional information. I have a character wiki, so you can read about the characters that are actually in the book and the settings, and my biography is in there. The biography of the artist is in there. You also can get a preview of some of the beautiful illustrations are in there. And the website is simply Old Grandmother's Tree, written as one word, no apostrophe, oldgrandmotherstree.com.
Wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. It's been fun.